Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening for all the people attending our virtual webinar. Appreciate it for you guys jumping on, and it's a exciting time for all of us, DataON and Microsoft, with the new product announcement that happened this week, Inspire. Hopefully everybody's staying safe. Please do. I see everybody is at a safe place. This is a great forum for us to engage, to see each other, a lot of good old friends that we haven't seen, but we try to do this once a month. But this month specifically is very special because with a lot of new information to share, and we're happy to have both John Marlin and Jeff Woolsey from Microsoft here to share that story. Feel free to ask questions, guys, throughout the webinar. If you're not talking, please mute. But feel free to jump up and just raise your hand and say, hey, I have a question, because the opportunity
Unknown
is here
participant is now joining.
For you to ask all your questions and make sure you learn about the new technology. So without further ado, maybe Jeff, you could start and share, what did you guys do? What did you guys make some announcement this week that's exciting? Maybe you could share with the customer, and then we can open up for discussion. There's a lot of places I want to go, but let's get this started.
Well, first, huge thank you to Howard and Jeff and everyone at the DataON team for the invite. We really enjoy these virtual meetups. We have a fantastic partnership together, and I really appreciate the opportunity to let us kind of drop into these and have an open chat with everyone who makes the virtual meetup. I'd also be remiss if I didn't say I hope everyone, wherever you may be around the world tuning in right now, is doing well, is staying safe. We know we live in kind of crazy times right now. We made some, we've been acutely aware of what's going on around the world. And in fact, this week we have Microsoft Inspire. It's a huge conference for us for Microsoft. It's a partner event. So normally this is, where we're spending a lot of time chatting with partner. Obviously, because we live in the world we do, it's been happening virtually this week. And so a lot of announcements have gone out. A lot of things have been public. And at the same time, we've also spent a lot of time contributing and doing what we can to help with COVID response, whether it's first responders, whether it's helping with education, with online education, whether it's remote work, whether it's people just trying to, figure out how we can, we've dedicated Azure Compute Hours, we're doing everything we can. And again, we just hope everyone is doing well and staying safe. At the same time, this is a huge, Inspire is a huge time for us to kind of chat with our partners about what some of our top goals are. Obviously, remote work is something that's incredibly important to us, and obviously with what's going on, we continue to focus on that. At the same time, customers have also told us that, even throughout the things that are going on, app modernization, infrastructure modernization are still things that are critical to them. And if you look at the first release of Azure Stack Hci, if you would have asked me if it was going to be successful beforehand, I already knew it was going to be. And there were a lot of people, there was a lot of discussion internally over, how successful. And it has been extremely popular. We went from a few dozen to over 200 different solutions available in no time because the market demand was off the charts. People wanted everything from small 2-node systems to 4 to 6 nodes to full data center, give me racks of servers of kind of deployments with Azure Stack Hci. We also definitely hit a critical point where customers said, you know what, the HCI thing works for me. I love the fact that you're putting my storage, my networking, my compute in an entire package. You're giving me an easy way to manage this through Admin Center. You're giving me hardware integration in Admin Center, for example, DataON's plugins to Admin Center, as well as hybrid integration. For customers that are already doing hybrid integration, they love that they've built it in. For the customers who aren't there yet, they love to know that it's just a click away. So we knew it was going to be successful. It has been off the chart successful. And so we knew immediately, all the signs were there that we wanted to double down and triple down. And so that takes us to really what we announced this week. We announced Azure Stack Hci version 20H2. So this is the next generation of Azure Stack HCI, and it's actually a very, very big change for us. The existing version of Azure Stack HCI today involves using the Windows Server 2019 bits, and then spending a lot of time with our partners like DataON to validate and test and make sure we come up with the exact right solution so that you'll be successful. And that partnership is extremely important, because one of the things we have seen is people that try and build these out of spare parts or use their old, last generation or a couple generations old servers from production and try to cobble these together, never had a good experience. When we spend the time to do the validation and create this end-to-end solution, it's amazing. Well, what we're doing now is we're basically saying, based on all the success we're having, this next generation is different. First of all, it's its own specialized host operating system. So this is the Azure Stack Hci OS. So it is different. It is not Windows Server. And just to give you an example, if you've seen any of my presentations over the last few years, you've heard me talk about, how I'm very annoyed that in the year 2020, we still ship Windows Server with a built-in fax server. It drives me absolutely crazy. But you know what? Guess what? It's their customers that rely on it. So it's never, we just can't remove it. Well, by moving to a new product and saying, this is going to be the premier infrastructure product for software-defined compute, storage, and networking, it allows us to say, great, this is an absolutely special purpose focused product. It means it has the hypervisor, Hyper-V. It has storage spaces direct. It has software-defined networking. Those capabilities are there. You won't find a print server. You won't find a fax server. You won't find domain controllers. It won't find any of those things for an infrastructure product. It is a specialized host product. It also allows us to deliver more capabilities on a very focused infrastructure product. We have new capabilities. I'll let John talk to some of those in just a minute. For example, the work that we're doing in Stretch HCI. We're bringing some brand new technologies that we have never had in an infrastructure product before. So, first of all, it's a new operating system itself. Number two, it's delivered as an Azure service. And let me explain this for just a second, because I know there's been a lot of questions about this, a lot of people trying to figure out what this means. Let me be super clear. When you have an Azure Stack HCI 20H2 system, you register it with Azure. It now appears in the Azure portal. It's now manageable as an ARM resource. So think about this. If you've got a couple of data centers, or you got a couple dozen, many branch offices around the world, guess what? You plug in your Azure Stack HCI, you register it with the portal, and you go in and you now have an Azure Stack HCI with all of your HCI listings right there in Azure portal. I don't need to install any agents. This is integrated right into the Azure Stack HCI OS. So that Azure integration is right there. What that means is now you can start to think about managing your entire estate in a consistent way. So for example, if I've deployed Azure Stack HCIs, maybe in a bunch of different schools or in a bunch of retail environments or a bunch of manufacturing environments, and I want them to have a consistent group policy, I can take that policy from Azure Policy and apply that to all of my Azure Stack HCIs. I can see all of their patch status. I can see their monitoring status. I can see their backup status. And all of a sudden now you have a consistent management plane to manage not only Azure Stack HCI, but the stuff that you're doing in Azure. And so now the ability to see your entire estate becomes much, much easier. And it's really funny. 10 years ago, customers were literally they were spending lots of money to try to build this exact feature. They would say, Jeff, I want to be able to see my entire tech infrastructure. I want to see my estate. And they would take System Center running in this data center and System Center running in this data center. And they would try to cobble all of these things together, federate these things, synchronize, put all of this in a database, see logs. And they'd end up with something that maybe did what they wanted it to, but they were never happy with it. We've essentially built this right into the platform. Now we've created a global management and a management plane through Azure to see your on-prem, your cloud, all of these things in a hybrid way right there in a consistent pane of glass. In addition to being an Azure service, it also means you're being billed through Azure. So guess what? It just appears as part of your bill. So if you already have your purchasing through Azure, guess what? It's just seen right through there. Now we've made the Azure preview bits available. They're publicly available right now. There's no cost. So we want you to try this out. It's also not supported, so be careful. This is not for production use. It's free, but it's also, again, unsupported, but it allows you to actually register with Azure so you can see what it'll look like, what a subscription bill. Right now, it'll all be zeros, of course, because it's preview. But we've, because this is an Azure service, we've also announced the subscription billing is very, very simple. One of the things we wanted to do is we want to make the billing very simple, consistent with the cloud, but also make it predictable. Because one of the challenges people have is they do not like unpredictability in their billing. I don't want my bills to go like this. So we made it real simple. It's $10 per physical core. That's it. You can have as many VMs or as few VMs as you want. Don't care how much memory you've assigned to it. Doesn't matter. It's per physical core. Really simple. Okay. So that's what delivering is an Azure service, and we'll talk more about that. And then finally, the last thing is just we also want this at the same time to be familiar. I don't want you to have to learn a new language. I don't want you to have to learn new tools. This is managed via Admin Center. If you already have a big investment in things like System Center and you have monitoring for your apps or whatever, guess what? You can use that as well. Okay. Your favorite backup tools, guess what? Those are just going to work. All right. We will have, we will work with them to validate and certify and make sure everything works. But we want this to be familiar as well. So we think we're very excited about this, and we think this is going to bring a whole new paradigm to how people are thinking about their on-premises and their cloud. We're trying to bring these closer and closer together, because at the end of the day, what our customers keep telling us is we love what you're doing with hybrid. We get it. Microsoft is leading in this space. Nobody is coming close to what you guys are doing. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep delivering hybrid. Keep making it easier so that, guess what? I can see all of my things together and my on-prem and my cloud just work together. So with that, I'll pass it on back to you guys. Does that make sense, Howard?
Yes, it does. And thank you for that summary. I think, I'll have a lot of questions, but I got to reserve the question to the customers, because there's a lot of people here that are running the Azure Stack HCI today. And let me post let me post the way I see this solution, why it's so exciting to us at DataON. Number one, I think is becoming a true hybrid cloud platform where you could take advantage of Azure services. That's one. Number two, it's going to help penetration for a lot of our customers to a smaller environment without paying the heavy data center license, right? We know how that model works. You had to do the data center license before, but let's say I have a 2-node Kepler, 2 nodes for the edge, or small office or small medium enterprises that's running 5-10 VMs. Essentially, with the new pricing model, you have the ability to drive that price down. I think that's a huge, huge advantage to our customers and small medium enterprise adoption. That's number two. Number three is taking advantage of feature and capabilities that they need ahead of time. Stretch cluster is a great example. Today we are, believe it or not, there is a customer that we already have a PO that will be deploying this preview version to. It's a school, and they want to have resiliency cross-platform. So we built a 2-node Azure Stack HCI OS between 2 campuses, right? And these 2 nodes are running 2-way mirrors, and they're going to do stretch cluster across the 2 nodes. We're actually going to do it, Jeff, and this customer already is in the preview program. No, they're not going to run production right away, but they will run production storage as soon as you release a bid in October or something like that, right? So it really addresses some of the pain point a lot of our customers have today, which is, yeah, I have a on-premises solution, but I need that redundancy in DR, and the stretch cluster really does solve that topic. So to me, those are, for me, from a business perspective and talking to so many customers, that your new solution really deliver and bring to our customer base to deliver that benefit they want today.
Yeah, I can tell you that Stretch is, it's a really impactful feature, and we should let John talk about that in 1 second. But I'll just point out that, I know people that have deployed Stretch topologies, for many, many years, and they're used to paying 5 and 6 figures just for the license to do the Stretch, just for that alone. Like forget forget all the other stuff. Just to be able to do that, that's what they're used to paying. So the fact that we're integrating Stretch as part of the new Azure Stack HCI is an extremely compelling feature. And I'm really glad to hear that it's going to an education, because, these are folks that, 5, 6 figures, they just can't do that. And we want to help everybody at all different price points. So providing a new option at a different price point and less upfront, because again, you're talking about $10 per core per month, versus a huge data center license, which can be a big purchase up front and can be a challenge for folks. So I think, being based on what you just said about Stretch, I think, John, you want to take a moment to kind of describe, what's cool and what's different and what's new in Stretch HCI. I know one big question we keep getting asked is, Stretch is kind of an overloaded term. There's both Stretch cluster and there's Stretch HCI. And so maybe it'd be helpful, John, if we talked a little bit about the Stretch clustering, which is something we've had in Windows Server since, I believe, 2003, and Stretch HCI, which is the new feature we're adding in Azure Stack HCI, and kind of talk about what that is.
Yeah, Jeff. Basically, like you said, we've been supporting Stretch clustering, nodes of a cluster in separate locations, since 2003 is where we actually built some logic into site-specific stuff, but people were actually starting to do it back in the Windows 2000 days. So it's been here for a long time. It will continue along in the other products in the next version of Windows Server. We're not taking that away. It's just we're not supporting it with storage spaces direct in Windows Server. It's very specifically for HCI, purpose-built specifically for HCI. One of the things that we did—
Unknown participant is now exiting.
Some of the thought process that we've learned over the years from stretching clusters is there's a lot of configuration stuff. There's multiple IPs, there's replication, there's setting the sites up, all from a software perspective. So one of the things we worked really hard at is to make it easier. There's less things to do that could cause typos, could be some confusion, some miscommand somewhere, anything like that. So what we did with Azure Stack HCI and Stretch is we built a lot of detection into each of the processes you go through when you're creating it. So for example, when I create the cluster itself, new-cluster, we've got some detection built in to go and see, are these nodes in a different site? So in a lot of the surveys, a lot of talking that I did with customers, most, probably 3/4 or so of all the customers I talked with, they define sites within Active Directory. So what we did was we now detect, when you create a cluster, are these nodes a part of a site defined within Active Directory? If it is, we go ahead and create the sites for you, put the nodes in the sites. So the cluster is aware, okay, I'm going to be stretched, I'm going to be in different sites. Then what we did was, when you enable cluster storage spaces direct, we go and look, are the nodes a part of a site? If it is, we need to make sure we've got replication and replication. So let's go and check all the nodes and make sure storage replica or inbox block storage replication technology, is it installed? If it's not, we pop up a dialog box and says, hey, this node doesn't have it. and we stop right there because we don't want you to have any misconfigurations from that. We stop, you go and install it, you go and enable S2D again. Goes and looks, everything's good there. We see we're a part of sites. Now we go ahead and create the site scope pools for you. So each site has a defined pool. So this isn't something that you're having to create manually. What we're also doing as a part of creating the pool is naming the pool. We're naming the pool per the site. So for example, I've got a Seattle site, I've got a Redmond site. I will go and create the name pool for site Seattle, pool for site Redmond. Easily identified which site the pool is on. As a part of the normal Storage Spaces Direct setup, it creates the cluster performance history. So you can gather all the data about how you're performing and stuff, view it with either PowerShell or a lot of the great graphs and such that Windows Admin Center can show. And with Azure Stack Hci, we need to make sure that it's replicated because it can only reside on one pool. So we're taking the extra step to actually set up replication of the cluster performance history. Okay, so basically, quick rundown, 2 things I've done, and I'm almost ready to go. New cluster, set up sites for you. Enable cluster S2D, I've created the pools, I've named them, I've set up my cluster performance history as replication. Now the next thing I need to do is create my drives. Old ways of creating drives was, I won't say it was a painful process, but it was a lengthy process. Move available storage to a particular node in a site, go to that site, create your drives, move available storage to the other site, go over there, create your drives there, create a my storage replica command that's that long, that wide, that long, easily have typos for you. Well, that we've made is an easier process too. What we did is we worked with the admin center team and we created, storage replica was already there, but we enhanced it, greatly enhanced it. So now when you connect to your Azure Stack HCI with Windows Admin Center, you go to volumes and you create a new volume. What it's going to do is it's going to bring up a new dialog box for setting it up. It's going to ask you, are we creating a volume for a single site, or are we going to replicate between multiple sites? I choose replicate between multiple sites. That's 3 steps. The next thing you need to do is select which direction do I want to replicate this disk. Seattle to Redmond or Redmond to Seattle. That's 4 now. The next thing, asynchronous or synchronous, 5. And now let's create my drive. Let's give it a name. What size is it? What's the resiliency? And what drives do I want it to be there? Okay, so creating the drive, 5. If I simply choose next and not do anything else, we're going to create that data drive for you on the particular site. We're going to create the log drives on both sites for you. We're also going to create the drive you're going to use to replicate the data on the other site. And we're going to set up storage replica for you. And we'll name the groups all based off of what you call the drive. 5 steps, and I'm ready to start deploying VMs. How much easier can that get?
So
Yep.
what we're really talking about with Stretch HCI here is, again, this is a brand new scenario. This is a brand new capability. Again, Stretch Cluster something, as John mentioned, we've had even going all the way back as far as 2000. But again, that was non-S2D, that was non-storage spaces direct. That's going to stay in Windows Server. This is Stretch HCI, which is S2D integrated and is part of the workflow. Deploying it means, guess what? We can set this up for you, multiple pools, updated health, all your performance logs, site scoped. All of that is simply part and parcel of the process. Sync or async, both of them built in. And really the sync or async is built based on, your latency, based on your network essentially. And kind of the rule of thumb when it comes to sync versus async, and I've talked to a lot of people who have done this, theoretically you can go about 150 miles sync. I think in practical terms, most people tend to go about, 50 to 75, it's city to city, across campuses and things like that, as long as, you've got the latency. If you need to go, longer distance, like John said, if I wanted to go from Redmond to Seattle, I could absolutely do that sync. If I wanted to go from, say, Redmond, Washington down to Silicon Valley down in California, that's a little too far for sync. That's going to be an async. If I wanted to go from Redmond to Hyderabad, because by the way, we do that. We actually do replication literally halfway around the world. Yeah, you can do it, but it's going to be async. And literally, we're talking, the challenge here is speed of light becomes an issue. But the point here is we've given you both, and based on what the latency requirements are, you can go with either one. Sync I find very interesting because it turns out I run into a lot of big companies that actually tend to have large campuses, and they'll actually do synchronous replication across their campuses or between multiple campuses in the same city and things like that. And as Howard mentioned, different schools and things like that. So we're bringing a very powerful technology that for the longest time, quite honestly, you had to pay big dollars for. Was only an enterprise feature, and we're basically saying, no, this is actually part and parcel of Azure Stack HCI, and we're going to make it integrated as part of the setup and deployment process. And so that's what's new with Stretch HCI, is delivering the Stretch cluster to S2D environments in our software-defined compute. And so that's a really powerful new feature. And Howard, I was realizing, I feel terrible. We've been kind of giving a long preamble here. We've gone almost 30 minutes. We should probably open it up to questions. I'm going to pass it back to you, Howard. We can see what's on everyone's mind.
A lot of good questions. Let's start with some questions. And guys, again, just yell. You don't have to be courteous in this environment. Everybody knows each other.
Well, be courteous. So, you can be loud. Be courteous.
Yeah. Okay. I think the first question is, I think we answered it, is whether or not on the pricing side of it, is it $10 per core or physical core? I think the answer is physical core, right? The licensing model?
Physical core, absolutely. Okay. You can run as many VMs as you want. You can do it at, physical core.
There's another question. I think, Brandon, you can ask this question yourself. I put him on the spot since I know him.
Yeah, Hi, Brandon.
Hey, Jeff, great to see you guys on here. Sorry I don't have my webcam on today, but it's really just a build on to the licensing question. So we signed up for the preview program and had some talks on this, but a little bit of clarification would be great as far as $10 per physical core to license what you're talking about, but what about the guest OSs that run on top of that? That's still going to be.
This does not include guest licenses. This is an infrastructure product. And just to be super clear how we think about Azure Stack HCI going forward, the focus here is to provide the premier infrastructure product. This is this is where a huge amount of investment is going to go into our software-defined compute, storage, and networking. We are going to continue to be, we take features from Azure. You're going to see a bunch of those going into Azure Stack HCI, and in fact, the Azure Stack family. So what ends up happening a lot of times is features that we actually engineer, deliver, release, actually deploy at planetary scale on Azure. Eventually, we actually bring those into Azure Stack as well. So yes.
Got it.
Gotcha.
This question is actually. Go ahead, sorry.
Just like today, we're on a SPLA, and we do license. We use System Center as well, so we would just continue to do our core infrastructure suite and then add this $10 per core on top of it. Is that kind of how you see things?
So I believe so, but you're now talking about SPLA, and I'm going to be super transparent. I'm not on the marketing side of the house. I'm not on the business side of the house. So I'm going to say I believe that's going to be the case, but I'm not going to give you a firm answer because I don't want to give you the wrong answer. I'm sure we'll get, as we get closer to the GA, we can follow up with you there, or we can follow up with you in our conversations that we're having in the private preview.
Perfect. Thank you, guys.
again, I don't want to give you the wrong answer.
Jeff, this question actually is something in my mind a lot of people are asking is, a lot of our customers today sitting here and talking to us already have Azure Stack HCI run in 2016 or 2019. What is the upgrade path with the current hardware? Any thoughts there?
Yes, so a couple things. First of all, let me be very clear about the word upgrade. Upgrade usually means, you're going from like 2016 data center to 2019 data center, or 2012 R2 data center to 2016 data center to 2019. This is a new product. This is not Windows Server. So technically, upgrade is kind of not the right word. It's kind of a cross-grade type thing. So a couple ways to think about this. Number one, since way back, since Windows Server 2012, we were actually the first hypervisor to do this, which is called shared nothing live migration. So I could easily live migrate a server from 2019 to Azure Stack HCI, and that would just work, and it would move the entire VM, storage and compute and everything. So that's one way. Another way is we, of course, have cluster-aware updating. So where you could actually drain a node of Windows Server 2019, add Azure Stack HCI into the cluster, join it to the cluster, move those VMs on over, and then upgrade essentially every single host. We are working on a lot more documentation to discuss this, but essentially those are the two top ways we're thinking about it. There's not going to be a double-click in-place upgrade because it's not actually an upgrade because it's not the same product. So those are kind of the two ways to think about it.
It is a realistic question that a lot of our customers have. They want to take advantage of the pricing, perhaps take advantage of the features, perhaps. Mm-hmm. And if they're running a 2019 cluster with the hardware, I'm not going to go try to force them to buy new hardware. I think they just want to take advantage of all the features, and we do need to be very clear from the Microsoft perspective to help them to get to those new features so they can leverage it. I think this is an important topic.
Yes.
Can I ask a clarifying question on that real fast?
Sure, please.
So are we saying that, I get it would be a clean install on the host itself, but we're saying that an Azure Stack HCI OS would be able to join an existing Azure Stack HCI deployment today?
An Azure Stack HCI, the next generation, which is an Azure Stack HCI OS could join a Windows Server 2019 cluster so that you could go through that process of draining the nodes and upgrading every node in the cluster. So yes.
Perfect.
Correct, and that's 2019 only. For the cluster rolling upgrade process, it's only one version difference.
Sorry, thank you.
So you can't do 2016 to Azure Stack HCI. Has to be 2019. So I mean, and I did write up a doc on upgrading jumping versions with clustering, because your normal Windows Server upgrades you can go to. So you can go to from like a 2012 R2 to a 2019, or a 2016 to whatever the next version is going to be. But for Azure Stack HCI clustering, you'd have to go from 2016 to 2019 to Azure Stack HCI. So you have that extra little step that you would have to do. And I've got some documentation on it off our docs.microsoft.com site that it walks you through that process. And that's specific for Windows Server. But you can plug in Azure Stack HCI in there as well.
But I think, John and Jeff, it is also realistic to think there's a lot of customer on 2016 today, and how to discuss and figure out if they want to get to that OS. So probably have to think through a little bit more, because there is a lot of them on there, as I know today, our customer base. So if that's the process, then we have to guide them through that process properly, so there won't be any hiccups. I'm going to ask a question that I don't believe, I'm not even sure I'm breaking any kind of disclosure, but I didn't see it announced yesterday, is that clearly DataON was in the Inspire keynote, and our logo was placed next to a lot of OEM, and thank you. Mm-hmm. Anything special between different, you didn't talk about what a validated system and that topic. Is that something that is disclosed or not disclosed in the current announcement?
There are some areas where we haven't gone fully. We haven't.
Okay.
We haven't spilled all the beans yet. There's a lot of things that we still have some more fun things to disclose for Azure Stack Hci. I'm not sure we actually got into a lot of detail in what you're thinking about.
Got it. Okay. I think I want to mention to the customer as well is that there's a lot of more stuff that the goal is to make your life easier, right? And Microsoft clearly thinks about that. A lot of your challenges you face today relate to upgrades, BIOS firmware. It's something that we're addressing because it is a major thing that we have to address as a support team at DataON as well. So as the new OS comes about, please understand that, hey, Microsoft want to compete in this marketplace with the vSAN and Nutanix of the world. Let's be very prescriptive about it. And we want to make sure that experience is at par for sure, right? Because that's what it takes to compete in the marketplace. And whatever that experience is, I believe the goal is for us as our ecosystem and Microsoft to get there, that experience. I don't want to say anything that's not revealed, but there's a lot of stuff there as well, just so you guys know.
Yeah. Hey, Howard, this is Tim.
Okay. Hey, Tim.
So, I ran through the install yesterday, the HCI Azure Stack. So pretty much all automated, pretty simple to do. Some of the questions I have is when we're setting up our STD 2019 clusters, we have this all scripted out with PowerShell. Using all Mellanox products, it's DataON products is who we use. But we typically, you have to turn on jumbo frames. You've got to set your RDMA, make sure that's set, your RSSA. We're doing all these things within our scripts. And of course, you don't see any of that when you run through the install of Azure Stack HCI. So I'm just curious as to how the install is doing that. I can go back in and look at that stuff because you still have that capability, but what is the default settings for that stuff? As a techno nerd, we've been doing this for 5 years already, so it's like we know that stuff has got to be right, or your stuff is not going to work right.
Now, when you say you don't see what you're setting up, when you're setting up like cluster and storage spaces direct and so forth, is that what you're talking about?
Correct.
New dash cluster to create the cluster, enable dash cluster S2D, and then new dash volume. That's all it's doing.
Okay.
In the back, that's all that's basically going on in the background.
So any customization or any of the NIC stuff you still have to do, right?
Correct.
Jumbo frames, the RDMA,
Correct.
RSS, all that stuff.
And just to be clear, this is part of the reason we're in preview, and part of the reason that cluster deployment is still in preview. We've added some new things to the cluster deployment. I'm sure you noticed that if you downloaded the latest version of Admin Center. The switch configuration has gotten better. There's some new, just some diagrams that help kind of displaying what's going on, but there's a lot more that's going on with the virtual switch configuration. There's still more that is in the works right now that we're still working on. For example, RDMA is a big part of that. So you're going to see more of that light up as we go through preview and throughout the next couple months. So yes, there's a bunch of work still happening, especially on the network offloads.
Perfect. And there's the icons are prettier now too.
Yes, there are new icons too.
Mark, you have some question you want to post those?
Actually, let me go ahead and tackle these because it actually kind of leads into
Sure.
Ernie had roughly the same question, so I can hit them up both at the same time. The first thing is, and Jeff already kind of talked about this, Azure Stack HCI is purpose-built, very focused for HCI. Windows Server is more all the infrastructure roles, AD, DNS, and so forth. It will still have cluster store. It will still have storage spaces direct. It will still have that capability, but it will not have stretch. So to answer the first part of the question is there will be times where we will have features or updates that's very specific to HCI. When we have those, it will be in Azure Stack HCI. It will not be in Windows Server. On the flip side, same thing the other way around. We may have something that's very specific and focused for Windows Server that won't be in Azure Stack HCI. Okay. Now, for some stuff, there will be, it will be in all versions. For example, it hasn't been really announced per se. We basically announced Azure Stack HCI and stretch clustering. Stretch clustering being, that's the big thing about Azure Stack HCI. But we hadn't really talked about any of the other smaller stuff. One of them is the rebuild or resyncs of drives. When the way we do things with drives and data gets written to the disk. We write all this data into what we call an extent, which is either a 256 meg or 1 gig chunk of space off the drive with that data, and then copy that data everywhere else so that it's spread out all over the place, so that if a drive fails, if a node goes down, we can still access the data. Now, when you go in and take a node down for like Windows updates, for example, those drives, nothing's written to those drives any longer. And everything starts writing to all the other drives. That drive comes back, or that node comes back up, those drives are back, they're available. There's a rebuild, a resync process that has to go on so that all of the extents that are relevant can be updated on those drives. Well, the way we were doing it in 2016 and 2019 is through taking the entire extent and copying it over. Doing that in 256 meg, 1 gig chunks, when all you did was change, say, 1 or 2K worth of information that might be in it, can take a while. So what we did is in Azure Stack HCI, we made it more granular. So what we're doing now is we're taking 256K chunks and resyncing those instead, which will tremendously speed it up. I mean, the couple of things that we've shown is, with about the 50% or so percentile. 2019, it would take 24 hours, roughly around 24 hours for that resync process to occur. Now that we're doing it on a more granular level, we've actually got it down to around 6.5 hours, which is tremendously fast.
Let me take a moment here. While John is explaining the nuts and bolts of this, I want to take a step back and point out the work that we've done here is far from trivial. This was not something that happened for a weekend. This is something that has taken a long time and a whole bunch of testing and performance optimizations to make this work. This wasn't some variable we set and said, let's go party on. There's a tremendous amount of development work that went in here to enable this new capability. And because of this, and because we are focused on Azure Stack HCI being the premier infrastructure product, this feature is a capability that is going into Azure Stack HCI. I do want to be clear about this. And this is going to become more important as we start to do things like expand the scale of storage spaces direct even further with Azure Stack HCI. If you remember back in 2016, we supported 1 petabyte. In 2019, we moved it up to 4 petabytes. We have a growing laundry list of customers that want us to blow that number out of the water and go well beyond 4 petabytes. So we've actually been focused very hard on making sure that Azure Stack HCI is positioned to do exactly that, and make sure that we can provide an optimal path for customers that want to go 8, 10, 12, even more petabytes of storage. So yes, this is also a new feature that is unique to Azure Stack HCI. And to be very clear, this is by far not the last. We are working on there are a whole bunch of new features that are going to go in Azure Stack HCI. And to be clear, you should not be assuming that anything is going into Windows Server. Don't make that blanket assumption. The way we think about this is Azure Stack Hci. This is a dedicated product to run on Metal. This does not run in virtual machines. This does not run your SQL Server. This is not for running apps. Again, this is not a general purpose operating system. This is a special purpose operating system that is designed to be a high performance specialty operating system for running virtual machines. That's its goal in life, and that is what we are fixated on. And quite honestly, if I go back through my email, this is something that people honestly have asked for a long time. You know, people have said, you know, I get that you make Windows Server, but golly, I wish you'd make a virtualization focused HCI product. Well, guess that's what we're doing. That doesn't mean that Windows Server is going anywhere. Windows Server is absolutely going to be critical, and it's going to continue to be around for all of the roles that it supports today: domain controls, file, DNS, DHCP, all of those things. But it's also, and of course, the runtime for your existing applications, your SQL Server, your Exchange, and your SharePoint. And we can continue to see an explosion. You see that exploding in the cloud as well as on premises as people, you know, deploying more SQL than ever before. And so Windows Server will continue to be the ideal platform for that. But Azure Stack Hci is the underlying ideal platform for running on the bare metal.
Hey, Mark, you have some questions. You could ask that questions.
Sorry, it's not so much a question, it's a statement. I mean, 26 hours is pretty great timing, but oh my God, if I got to patch one server a day, that's just atrocious. I mean, come on, if I have a server fail and I bring it back and, you know, let's assume another server fails, I got an 8-hour, you know, holy Christ moment waiting for that disk to rebuild. That's scary.
Well, one thing I will say about that is the time will vary, okay? Because it's all going to be dependent on, you know, how fast the drives are, how fast the network is, what kind of load is currently running on the what current loads are running on the servers. Because, you know, there are some CPU things. One of the things that we are looking at is a way of toggling how much processor, how much memory, and so forth that can be used. So in other words, you know, if I am patching my servers and it's I have my downtime set up for in the middle of the night, I want to be able to toggle that into use as much CPU as you can to even speed it up even faster. I would do that because there's no one or very little people that are connected. If this is something that's during the daytime, I want to toggle it down, let it run in the background, and let everybody still run their production stuff, but it's running at a lower CPU usage so that it does it in the background. The other thing too is, you know, is cluster aware updating. We've done a lot of work with cluster aware updating, and it's going to be checking to see if your storage is being done, if there's, you know, any resync jobs, any other kind of storage jobs like that that's running. So it's going to periodically check. So whenever you do any Windows updates, you know, you don't have to necessarily be sitting at the machine, but it's going to be taking care of it for you. Once node 1 is done, it will move to node 2, move everything around like it, to get everything off so it can be focused on doing the updates. And so it's going to keep track of it for you. Yes, it may take a while, but it's not like, you know, in the old days where before cluster aware updating, where you had to update one node, you had to sit there, you had to watch it. Once it's done, then you move to the next one. Cluster aware updating is doing a lot of that for you.
John, let me add a little context around the numbers you were talking about. The numbers that John is talking about, number one, are fairly worst case scenarios. You're talking a lot of spinning disks, you were talking a lot of changed blocks, and you were talking about a relatively loaded system. If you're on a system that's running with Flash, most likely, you know, most people aren't going to, like I said, these are relatively worst case scenarios, which is at Microsoft how we tend to test things. We tend to run things into the ground, and then we come back and see how we did. So on you know, more real world scenarios, we'll have numbers as we get closer to GA, but also to point out there are still lots of knobs and and optimizations that we can make in terms of performance. But again, unfortunately, it is a your mileage will vary thing based on, again, how much blocks have changed, how busy things are, and are you using, you know, underlying spinning disks. So now you're literally running into, you know, the physics problem in a little read-write head going across a disk, as opposed to, you know, NVMe or even SSD.
Yeah, we can attest to that. You know, we have experience where a lot of our customer today here are pretty much flat NVMe, and for that, you know, the rebuild it's much faster compared to other customer that has 4-node full of 40 drive, 160 hard drives, 14 terabyte. Even changing out that could take a while. So definitely, depending on the configuration and other components, the rebuild time could vary. But the fact that you guys are making a conscious effort on that topic means that you heard the pain that our customer are having, which is the time. So I'm glad you guys are addressing that topic, and that's a good thing.
And again, we're in preview, so we've got more optimizations to continue to work on as we continue to test it further.
I was going to say, on our real world numbers, we have a couple hundred, just over 200 virtual machines running on a 4-node flash cluster. And during our patch cycles, it's less than 40 minutes rebuilds.
Yeah, that's yeah, and that's going to get faster.
That'd be great. So
that's usually what's usually typically more what we see. Again, we're talking about, John's quoting some areas where we were literally running the system in the ground on some old spinning disks. So.
Yeah, we did a lot of testing with this as well when we first started a few years ago with SSDs up front, NVMe's. We took a brand new 4-node cluster, and I think we had 12 disks in each host. We would actually go in just to see how it would fail and how it would operate, and we would just start pulling a disk out of each node, one at a time, until the whole cluster would fail, because nobody could tell us what would happen. And so we would actually go through this several times until basically all the virtual machines will migrate to one host, which is kind of funny. We thought they would be across all of them, but they'd all migrate to one host, and then the other host would slowly start dying, and we'd just start popping disks back in and let it rebuild and stuff. And we would check our times, and we found out that if, you know, they say recommend 10% as cache, and actually it should be a little bit more than that. If you're looking for better rebuild times, the more cache you have seems to actually improve your rebuild times. Now, hopefully, with the new HCI and some of the stuff they've done, it'll get better as well. And that's just, you know, stuff we've seen from the field, and we test all our clusters the same way. I mean, we'll set them up before we take them to the customer, and we'll do a lot of the same stuff. We'll pull the drives out, we'll make them fail. It's just something we do.
Thanks, Tim. That's insightful.
And also, you know, remember when Bill said his 4 nodes with in a good time, you know, he does have hard drive in that solution as well, right? So that's, and the fact that, Bill, you use cluster aware update is really very important, because that's going to be a very key feature as we move forward, right? Leveraging all the automation in the background that let the stuff run while in production. That is something that is very important to make sure production stays up while you do all the updates.
Yeah, we actually use some managed service stuff because we're an MSP for a lot of our customers, and we were doing all the patching through that managed service software. But for all of our S2D clusters, we've actually migrated it over to cluster aware updating on 2019. All of them that are 2019. 2016, it's still, we won't do it there, but on 2019, we use the cluster aware updating now because it seems to work better.
Yeah. I think one of the questions that comes up quite a bit with our customer as well is that is this like a different patch cycles? Like, you know, given this is a new OS with Azure Stack HCI, brand new infrastructure product, how does that align to like the patching, like the Windows Server? How does that work?
No, that's important. And one thing we want to do is, again, remain consistent. We're not gonna change it and have different patches on different cycles. Everyone obviously expects things to come on a consistent consistent way. So we're not changing anything there. I just was actually double checking something. So it turns out we did announce what you're talking about. So let's talk about patching for a second. I just wanted to double check with someone. So one really cool, since we're talking about patching, and this I think is very exciting. This is something, again, specific and unique to all the cool stuff we're doing with Azure Stack HCI. Because we partner so closely with, again, our partners like DataON, we want to make sure that we are giving you, again, an optimized infrastructure product. And we continue to blur the line between the hardware and the software. And again, the work that we do here is to make it as elegant and as easy for you so that you're not spending time trying to, put all the pieces together. You're running your environment, you're running your VMs in your productive. One of the things that we wanted to do to drastically improve this environment was patching. And we all know, we talk to you guys all the time, and whether it's a virtual meetup, whether it's our MVPs, or whether it's a trade show, you always tell us anything you can do, Jeff, to make patching better, we would love it. We'll be so happy. So one of the things that's going to be new to Azure Stack HCI is the patching process. So number one, you're all aware of cluster-aware updating. We've been doing a ton of work to improve cluster-aware updating to make it more resilient, more reliable, better performance. But in addition, we are also integrating with our hardware partners. So for example, when you go to update a cluster, not only does it get your updates for Azure Stack HCI, but I want to get all of your firmware updates, your BIOS updates for your Mellanox drivers, for your chipset drivers, for your storage. So no more hunting around. I don't need to go to a website and go look for these. I don't need to go to a Mellanox page or a different page and look for all of my drivers. I want to simply go to my Azure Stack HCI dashboard. I want to click on the update button. And the first step is, let's go check to see, do you have any updates that you need for the OS? Okay. And there's a chance, by the way, because Azure Stack HCI is a different product than Windows Server, there's a very good chance that there may be fewer patches. Of course, we only release once a month, but there could be, there'll be fewer patches because we don't have the same composition as like Windows Server. Again, Windows Server has print and fax and IIS and domain controllers and all of these other things. Azure Stack HCI doesn't have those. So if a patch isn't required, guess what? You're not susceptible to anything there and no patches needed. Once you've gone and queried for all of the Azure Stack, any OS updates, cumulative updates for Azure Stack HCI, the next step is, okay, now, since you bought a DataON solution, okay, let's go check with, the validated solution that you got from DataON. Let's go see if there are any updates. Oh, guess what? There's an Intel BIOS update for this chipset. Oh, you're using Mellanox cards. Guess what? There's an update here for the Mellanox drivers. Great. Oh, by the way, you're using this type of storage. Perhaps there's an update here. And any sort of updates specific to this Azure Stack HCI solution will now appear here. So you can download those. You don't have to go hunting and pecking. And then finally, you click on install, and it's going to go through this whole process. It's going to update it's going to update the OSs. It's going to update the firmware. It's going to perform all of the updates for the servers themselves. And it's going to do this in a coordinated fashion through cluster-aware updating. And again, in a process that we have tested and validated together. So the goal here is to provide an elegant solution so that, guess what, we've made patching easier, hopefully fewer reboots, fewer having hunting, pecking around, and most importantly, we're all using the same configuration. Because if there's anything we have learned from running the cloud, homogeneity is critical. By making sure that all of our servers up in Azure are running like literally the same BIOS and the same firmware, not on just the motherboards, but on NICs and storage and everything, allows us to, really test and validate that configuration. It's when you find out that you've got some configuration drift in like BIOSes and firmware that things can get wonky. So we want to make sure that we are doing a consistent patch across all of your clusters. And again, imagine now, again, in the context of your Azure portal, imagine, logging logging in your Azure portal, seeing all of your data on Azure Stack HCI solutions across all of your different locations, maybe different states, different countries, and also being able to see their patch status from there as well. So yes, a huge part of this is a brand new patching and firmware updating in addition to the OS updates through Azure Stack HCI.
Yeah, I wanna highlight this. I'm not sure how big this is to DataON. DataON being committed to this technology, this solution is investing a lot, because our pain point from the customer has always been, when we give you a solution, we give you what the current BIOS firmware driver is on your platform, whether or not it's a server, SSD, NVMe. So you know exactly what level you're at. Our traditional recommendation has always been, if it's not broken, don't touch it. Not the Windows patch, but the Windows Server BIOS firmware driver, because when you do those updates, it requires you to do tools, requires you to have downtime, take a node offline, reboot the node. There's a lot of stuff happen that could impact your production environment. Really, we're being very careful. What Jeff just articulated is there is a capability in the new Azure Stack HCI OS in the future with cluster-aware update, where these updates will built into the process and seamlessly update for you if you desire. It's your choice. No one's going to force you to do anything. Once you will have visibility on what is the latest firmware driver that we have tested against the OS every month as a golden image, right? So you know what the latest one we have tested at DataON as the infrastructure owner. Second, you should have the ability to use cluster-aware update as a tool to update these hardware-related BIOS firmware from the background without major impact into your production environment. That is a huge thing that we're spending a lot of time on, and hopefully by that time, everything will be right. But it is a huge experience I talked about that we need to deliver to our customer to make sure that as you choose Azure Stack HCI, that experience is really there for you to have it.
So are you guys going to, this is for Microsoft, be bringing some of that over into just 2019 S2D as well, or is this strictly going to be for HCI?
This is for Azure Stack HCI validated solutions.
Okay.
Okay, to be super clear, because we can't do this on any random bit of hardware that gets deployed as a solution. There's just too many. Just to be super, transparent. There's just too many combinations. The matrix is too high. So by working together in partnership with DataON and our other partners, we can validate all these configurations.
Well, our stuff's DataON, so we're good then, right?
So you're good. You're totally good. I'm kind of curious. I'm looking at the chat window. Does this sound like something that's interesting, folks? Do you guys like the idea of guess what? Getting all of your hardware patches in here too? I'm surprised at how quiet it is.
Yeah, everybody should be jumping up and down and yelling. I feel like that's always the pain point for every single customer. Every one of you have that pain point.
Look, we listen to you guys, so I love your feedback.
Yeah, as we know, we've gone through the iterations of making and breaking stuff because we didn't have the right firmwares on. You end up calling tech support, and it's like, are you here? Are you here? Are you here? So, and so we've got a matrix that we had to build out that you have to be here for this and this and this. So to be able to get that from your software vendor and your hardware vendor all in one thing is freaking awesome.
Well, and honestly, the feedback we've heard from DataON as well as the other hardware partners, honestly, they're excited about this because, look, we think this is a win for everybody. If we can provide you the right firmware, the combination we know that works, it spends less time in our support queues trying to hunt down and make sure, well, what BIOS are you using? If we can just make this part of the update process, it's going to help us down the road when we go, oh, the reason why you're having this problem is, guess what? One of your servers has a slightly different firmware that's causing a problem that the other 9 nodes in the cluster don't have. And so we think in the end, everybody's a winner out of this.
Hey, Paul,
you're muted, John.
Sorry about that. One of the other nice things about it, working with the partners to be able to do this is I originally came from support. So I saw a lot of issues where, a customer would be on clustering back when we had certified solutions for failover clusters as well. What could happen is they would upgrade to, say, a later firmware or the latest firmware. But as it turns out, there was some tweak or something like that in the firmware that would cause clustering to have problems. But it would only affect clusters. So what our partners such as DataON can do is using very specifically focused with Azure Stack Hci, when they go through this process of updates and they go to the solutions page to go out to DataON on site, DataON can come back and say, okay, you're on HCI, so I want to make sure this is the specific bias that we know works, that we want you to be on. May not be the latest, it might be the latest, but you know for a fact it's going to work. That's going to make everything easy for everybody, less support costs, less downtime. And that's a big win. And what I was going to say earlier is, the program manager here that owns cluster aware updating, I will be passing a lot of this stuff on to him. He has been working tirelessly on cluster aware updating for years, trying to get cycles to get stuff done. He's got a list, yay long of stuff he wants to do.
And
it is getting better.
And we've been cranking through that list too.
Exactly. It will get better. He's going to make sure it gets better. He's got his teeth in it and he's not letting go. And
the other thing is, because our partners like DataON have been giving us so much feedback and have been so excited about it, it really helps when we get when our dev team's involved. They're like, wow, we're getting a ton of feedback from the partners. They're like, yeah, they see the value in this, and more importantly, we see what the customer value is in it. So I've done it. I've been testing this myself, and every time I do it, I'm frankly blown away. I'm just like, this is exactly what I've always wanted to do, to make it this simple, to just literally walk you through 3 clicks, update my OS. Are there any solution updates for this specific solution? Click OK and go. Get my cup of coffee and sit back and watch everything happen.
Hey, John, there was a question that was asked out there about the rebuilds and stuff.
Right. I was just going to answer it. Just going to get to those. Ernie and Mark both had the questions about it.
It's about SBL.
About SBL. As Tim alluded to, we do use the SBL cache for a lot of the resyncs. So yes, the more cache you have, the faster it could go. It's not just going to be a simple, like storage replica, take this block and write it to this block. It's not doing that. It's all going through the storage bus layer, so it's also all kept in sync. So it's going to be, I've got 4 nodes in the cluster, one rebuilt or one got rebooted, so I've got to rebuild it. I'm going to make sure that everything is, because we're spreading the data around. Node 2, Node 4 may have the same copies of the data. So because we're going through the storage bus layer, as the SBL cache is also keeping track of, okay, this has already been written. I don't need to write it again. So Node 2 wrote it. Node 4, when it comes time to say, I need to write that because this bit changed, doesn't have to. It's already done it. It already knows it. And the only way we can do that is to go through SBL. Otherwise, it's strictly blocks of data from everything that would actually increase the resync times.
So that's kind of key in the rebuilds, because the more cache you have, because as it comes into cache into the SBL, it then, within a certain amount of time, then writes it off to the physical disks. So the more cache you have, the faster it can actually sync, and the more it can sync before it has to write off onto the disks. And I think it's 60 seconds is when it defaults to start writing off onto the disks, if I'm correct on that.
Good point.
Hey, Jeff, I have a quick question. Well, not question, I just needed more clarification. So let's say you have a 2-node cluster today. Hey, how are you?
I saw your camera just came on. I wanted to say hi.
Yeah, hello. So we just purchased 2 clusters from DataON. Thanks, Howard, for rushing those orders. But they 2 clusters, 2 node. So if we wanted to do this migration later on, is it possible to add a 3rd node as HCI OS and then move nodes? Like, how would that work? Is that possible?
You can add a 3rd node. The challenge becomes the underlying storage is a little bit different. You have nested resiliency in the 2 node. When you move to 3, the underlying storage is going to change the how it's configured. But if you wanted to add a 3rd node, yes, you could. Let's just start off with that question. Yes, you could add a 3rd node. You could drain the nodes off, and then you could upgrade the other nodes in the cluster. You would be running in nested resiliency mode, which is, what you need for a 2-node configuration. When you move to 3 nodes, and you generally want to change the underlying storage types to a more storage efficient manner. But to answer your first question, yes, you could.
Right, and it all depends on your resiliency. If you went with, say, like a 2-node mirror, add it in and go. It's just all dependent upon what resiliency. The nested resiliency that Jeff's talking about is only available with 2-node. Some people do it, some people don't. Some people just use it as a 2-way mirror. So once you add that 3rd node in, all we're going to do is take that two-way mirror and split it out between 3 nodes instead of the 2.
All right, I'll work with DataON to figure out if it's possible or not.
So Malik, what's going to happen? He's going to call us, go do it, and we have to make it work. That's usually how it works, isn't it?
That's right.
So, but it is, Jeff, as you see, it is a real question, right? We have to get this process right. Everybody here are very interested, but they really need to figure it out, that transition point, and we want to help them transition for sure. It's kind of our prerogative. But we ourselves at DataON with you guys need to do this hundreds of times to make sure there's no flaw, because these are production systems.
Yes. No, I understand.
Right.
I understand that, and the 2-node is, it's a very specific config, and quite honestly, when we first released HCI, we started off with 4 nodes as the minimum. And we then went down to 3 nodes thinking, okay, 3 nodes should be plenty. This should be small enough. It gives everybody the HA that they want. And that was when we had people come back. We said, no, we need it even smaller. And I have to admit, I was more than a little surprised to hear that. But when people came back with really, they said, look, I need it as minimal as possible, but I have to have the HA. So they were like, I'm not willing to give up HA. I'm not willing to give up resiliency, but I need to fit within a specific, power budget or a specific actual physical budget or a price budget, whatever. And so that's why we went all the way down to 2. And nested resiliency was kind of the innovation we built in to enable that to happen. But so we do have to look at, the differences between 2 and 3 node. There are benefits. If you think you're going to stay on 2 node for a while, then fantastic, stay with 2. I always tell people, if they think they're buying this 2 with the notion that, hey, you know what, maybe someday we'll have 6 or something like that, then start to figure out, well, do you want to start with 3 as your base or stuff like that? But it really depends on where you are and what your budget is and what your business requirements are. And as I keep pointing out to Howard, I'm always shocked. He's got the Kepler nodes and he's got these very small nodes, but it's amazing how much power that can be delivered in even these very small configurations. And I think Storage Review actually did, they've had now reviews of both your Kepler as well as the other rack units, and they've just absolutely loved it. And I remember with the Kepler one, they were like, we can't believe the performance we're actually getting out of something this small. So it really speaks to, the solution altogether.
Coming from the MSP side, in the middle of the United States, we're in flyover country out here, so we have a lot of small businesses that are asking for redundancy. They don't want to put in a SAN. They don't want to pay data center licensing for 5 virtual machines. So for us, the Kepler 2 node is kind of a perfect fit, but I don't want to have to buy data center either, or I've got to have X number of standard licensing to be able to make this work. So having this come out gives those companies a step into Azure and gives us a way to manage them as a tenant so that we can actually bring them in, give them HA. We don't have to buy data center. It's just a win-win.
Yeah, no, and I've seen, you mentioned flyover country. I've seen this in all parts of the world. I've seen this in Australia, for example. There was a company, there's a mining company, and they're literally, they're literally mining precious minerals in the middle of nowhere. Cell towers? No, there's nothing. Okay, so for them, they needed a small solution, but they still needed, they have minimal network connectivity just to get the bare minimum of things, but they need to run their apps and they need to support the folks in these pretty remote locations. And so having a small thing, just like this to do file sharing, to do basic server needs in remote locations, I think we're hitting a really fantastic area. And then when they do go back and they do connect to the internet, guess what? They can take advantage of all those capabilities and additional services as well. So there's a lot of different scenarios we're opening up with Azure Stack HCI.
That did bring up one other thing is, how often do they need to connect to Azure?
Oh, great question. So we basically, you don't have to be connected all the time, but we do have to check in once every 30 days. It's a very small, it's a very small amount of networking required. Basically, we have to do the true up on the subscription to know how many compute hours and things like that, because again, we're licensing per course. But in terms of actual, the actual bandwidth required, it's super minimal, but it's once every 30 days.
Because I know that we have some customers, banking industries and stuff, that don't allow any of the hosting stuff to connect to the internet. So basically locking that down. So if these two hosts are going to go out, they can only talk to this, and they get a very small time frame to be able to do it.
Right.
Question from Paul regarding Azure Arc. Did you see that one? Paul, you want to ask that question?
Okay.
Sure. Yeah, I guess I'll put on my camera, follow you, so I'm not behind the times. So my understanding of the big part of it is obviously the integration with Azure, but Azure Arc is also something really great that's not released everywhere in the US. So I noticed on the website it said, there we go, my camera. It said GA in Q3 of this year for the majority of the US regions. I think a couple of them are public preview, but I guess Ignite is probably going to be Q3 anyway. So are you all wanting to line up that time as far as GA for Azure Stack HCI with Azure Arc?
So Azure Stack HCI, to be clear, the integration we have in Azure Stack HCI is native. It's actually a service built in, so it's not like we took some agent and automatically installed it. No, there's actually a service that's built in Stack HCI, so it is something different as native integration in the OS. Arc integration, absolutely. You're gonna see more there as well. In terms of how this all lines up with Azure, you'll see this for all of our services. As we deploy services, we never can just press a button and it lights up worldwide. I think we announced yesterday in Spire, we're up to 61 regions. We have the most regions on planet Earth over anybody, and we have just millions of servers. So we generally roll things out over multiple regions, and it does take some amount of time. I don't have the schedule, and I don't know what that schedule is, but our goal is quite literally, yes, this will be a worldwide. We want this to be available anywhere and everywhere.
Okay, I guess my main focus of the question is how Azure Arc may come into play for managing the nodes. For example, if you want all the hosts to not be domain joined, can Azure Arc help with the management of Azure Stack HCI nodes?
Got it. So yes, the Arc work is happening in parallel, and I don't think I can speak for the Azure Arc team. They're one of my sister teams we're partnered very closely with, other than to say is we'll have lots to talk about when we get to Ignite.
Yeah, just to add to that, Stretch HCI does require domain to be domain joined, and that's because of the storage replica. So I just wanted to make sure I added that. So that is a requirement. It's not necessarily a requirement of Azure Stack HCI. it's a requirement of storage replica. The
Got it.
other thing is from a VM standpoint, whenever you're talking about live migrations in a cluster, we require domain. We use Kerberos for authentication to be able to live migrate the VMs. So today, all nodes have to be domain joined in the same domain. We are looking forward. I am working with the Hyper-V team, and I own storage replica, so I'm working with the devs here to remove those dependencies. If you're an old-time cluster person, you'll notice as we've gone along, starting in 2008, each version of Windows Server we've come out from a clustering standpoint has less dependencies on Active Directory as we've gone along. The same thing's going to be there for Azure Stack HCI. We don't want to have to rely on a domain controller. Here's an example. One of the things that hasn't been announced, but is there, and I'm going to be blogging about it. I'll have a little video series on it as well, is Bitlocker. Whenever you Bitlocker a cluster drive, that Bitlocker key is stored in Active Directory and linked with the cluster name. So that each time you bring that name or bring that disk online, it's got to go out to Active Directory, get the key, bring it back, unlock the drive, and mount the drive. What we're doing here in Azure Stack HCI, and by the way, this isn't specific to HCI, so this will also be in the next Windows server, is when you Bitlocker a drive while it's in the cluster, we're going to create an additional Bitlocker key just for ourselves to use. We're going to store it in the cluster hive. We're going to encrypt it. We're going to also give you the option to back the key up onto like a USB drive, put it in a vault, however you want to do, so that you've got access to it. So that when you go and bring that drive online, it tries to go out to Active Directory. If there's a blip and you can't get there, previously the drive would fail, it wouldn't come online. Now it's going to say, oh, I can't get there. I've got my own key. Let me use that. It uses that, unlocks the drive, mounts it, you're up and going. So that's something else. Again, that's not really documented anywhere. That's one of the smaller things, but
it's not documented yet.
Yeah, not documented yet. But I'll have on the cluster blog, I'm going to have a little video series of each of the different things on stretch and setting it up, and some of the idiosyncrasies or some of the tweaks you may want to do on the virtual machine affinity, and then on the Bitlocker. I have separate blogs for it with as a video series, so that I'll walk through all those so that you are aware of them and can play around with them.
Can we have all that tomorrow?
Maybe Saturday.
Okay. Bill had a question, Bill. Your question, I kind of know what you're talking about because you have two clusters. You might want to stretch it. What, you have a question, Bill?
Yeah, and I should have said stretch HCI, but I guess to expand on that, so with our clusters, we're using the Mellanox switches for all of the storage traffic, and that's really awesome for us because then DataON configure those and sets everything up, and I just plug in some cables and I don't have to think much about it. But then if we got into a situation where we wanted to set up a stretch HCI, maybe between two sites or two buildings on campus, I'm curious what kind of networking requirements are there at that level between those two buildings in terms of both bandwidth and latency, and do we still need to think about all of the special settings that make RDMA work?
From a clustering perspective, we always want low latency networks. Because one of the things we do is send heartbeats between all the nodes. Are you there? Are you there? Are you healthy? And so forth. But we can tweak them. You know, we can tweak it to where that's checked up to every 20 seconds, once every 20 seconds. So that's not that big of a deal on a high latency network. We prefer it not to be, but it is. From a storage spaces direct perspective, again, high bandwidth, low latency networks. Because one of the things we do, as I was talking about earlier, when we write down the data, we spread it across all nodes. So if you've got a high latency or some sort of latency on the network, it's going to take a little longer to write all that data. Okay. And there's no specific requirements as far as, you know, what is the speed of the network? What is the latency? You know, what's the minimum latency that you can have? We don't really have any that documentation or documented anywhere because we don't want to limit it. We just make you aware, this is the type of network we want. Here's the byproduct of it if you don't. Now, from a storage replica perspective, that's where we get into the requirements. Whenever you're talking about synchronous replication, average less than 5 millisecond round trips is what we want, what we need for synchronous. We've got our validate tool, test storage replica topology. That's one of the things it's going to do is check for the latency. If it sees the latency is going to be average over 5 seconds, it's going to say, hey, you really don't want to use synchronous because it's going to slow you down. You want to do asynchronous. So that's the only, I guess you could say, documented latency speed that we have. As far as anything else, as far as RDMA requirements, how that should be set up and so forth, from a cluster perspective, storage space direct and so forth, we'll recommend you use RDMA, but we don't require it. We don't require any specific speeds because, you know, as I've seen over the years, and I'm not a network guy, you know, I'd let someone else deal with it. I don't want to have to deal with it. Mileage varies. It also varies between various different companies. You know, companies have their own network infrastructures built the way they want it to have it. So something that, say, a school system may have may differ from the school system that's right next door. The next school could be totally different. They're doing the same thing. They're having the same, you know, configurations of machines and what they're all running and, you know, where different servers are located. That's fine, but it's suited to their needs. So it's really hard to give any kind of requirements. We can do recommendations of, you need, the link speed between data centers. You have to have at least 1 gig speed, period. I mean, that's it. But we'll recommend 10 or 25 gig.
See, John, and I think this is where Bill was trying to go with this as well. Is, he's got Mellanox switches and stuff, but the replication doesn't happen from the storage side. The replication actually happens from the hosts, correct? So it's going to be coming from your host IP addresses, not from your storage IP addresses. So you're not connecting storage switch to storage switch. The replication
Correct.
actually comes from the host. So it's coming across your regular network that you would manage your hosts on. Typically you have a couple of NICs in there for your storage. You have a couple of NICs in there for the VMs to talk, and you have a couple of NICs in there for your management. So it's going to actually come out the management NICs because it's the actual hosts that are doing the replication. It's not the back-end storage. Your storage is still just running through your Mellanox switches. They don't need to be connected into your regular network to be able to transfer that storage across. The storage
Correct.
replication actually happens through the management NICs.
Correct, because we use SMB. So if RDMA is on your SMB NICs, then it can take use of it. If it's set for teaming, we use it. If it's has the ability to do SMB multi-channel, we use it. We just basically, here's a block of data, a network, SMB, get it over to this machine. However you got to do it, however you have to do it.
Got it. Hey guys, we're running out of time, but Taylor, you could be the last question. Your question is easy, that's why. Taylor, are you there?
No, I was just commenting that we had the same challenge as Mark. It was the comment.
Got it. You had a question about ASR. That's a good question, right? You
right.
said,
so with ASR, is failback from Azure to Azure Stack HCI V2 going to be supported?
Does Azure Stack HCI go through ASR failback? Is it all integrated properly? I guess that's the question. The short answer is absolutely, right, Jeff?
John is Mr. Replication, so I'm going to let him take that.
Yeah, between Azure Site Recovery and Azure Stack HCI as a service, as a DR, everything should be done seamlessly.
If you're doing,
but is it automatic?
Well, if you're doing VM replication, just like we do today, if you're using ASR for VM replication, then you configure it the exact same way through Admin Center. You go through VM through the VM tool, and you configure it to replicate in Azure. That's already, you can do that today, and that will absolutely be possible through Azure Stack HCI V2. So that's all there. That's all supported. The question is automatic? No, that's not automatic. Generally, when you're in that type of scenario, that's something you're going to want to either, there's options in Azure to do planned failover, test failover, unplanned failover. Those options are all available through the Azure portal. If you want to do the automatic failover, that the stuff that John's talking about, that automatic failover, that's all possible through the new Stretch HCI. But yes, ASR VMs, that's all part and parcel built in Azure Stack HCI V2 as well.
Got it. Okay. Hey, I can't believe it's an hour and a half. Jeff and John, thank you for jumping on. I'm sure that's more questions. The time flies.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, and guys, a lot more stuff coming. Reach out, ask questions. Happy to answer any question. We'll have another one of these a month from now. But thank you for attending, and I'm looking forward to talking, engaging with more of you moving forward. The product will GA in Ignite. So in a couple of months, this is GA. So download it and play with it. Okay.
Now, one thing I do want to leave with, and I just posted it in the chat. We do have a user voice page for any things that you see that you'd like to see changed, anything you'd like to see that gets added. We are monitoring that and seeing it. That's not for, and that's just simply for, hey, this is like this. It'd be nice if you had something like this, something like that. There's also a Q&A as well to more ask questions about. Think of it as, the old MSDN Windows forums, but it's a Q&A page. So a lot of the product group, we're looking at user voice. We're looking at the Microsoft Q&A. So if you've got any questions, if you've got any, things you'd like to see, please feel free. Here's the links that you can use it, and give us feedback. We want to hear it all.
Awesome.
And one last quick question I'm going to answer from Bronson. He has a question about backups. Is HCI moving to API-based backups, or can we continue to plan using agent-based? So Azure Stack HCI uses the Hyper-V-based resilient change block tracking API, so nothing has changed there. If you have, if you want to use backup from like Altaro or Veeam or whomever you want to, you can absolutely continue to use those. Agents will be allowed to be running on Azure Stack HCI, but not apps and stuff like that. Again, agents are acceptable, but that's, even that will go through a process to make sure that, we we have only supported solutions there. But we want to make sure all of your existing stuff, so that if you're an Altera, you're a Veeam, you're a, you have your favorite backup solution that you're using today, it just continues to work.
Awesome.
For those guys that want to, you can actually run this nested on an S2D cluster. So to preview
you can.
That's the best way to do it. I've already got mine running. What can I say?
Awesome, Tim.
All right, thanks, guys.
Huge thank you to everyone.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you all.
Talk to you soon.